Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this video. Today, we will have a topic in public policy cycles. So let me share my PowerPoint, my screen here. Turn down the volume, please. Okay. So let me start from the very beginnings of the lecture. So, uh, we have like some students, international students in our department, IGOV, International Program of Government Affairs and Administration. We have Jelly Kaderbu, we have Osid, then Russia, Miftah, and I think Galang is also participating in this lecture. Okay. So the topic of today, as I mentioned before, public policy cycles. And you can also read my book. This is my book on how the interest group coalition can influence the decision making processes in a local government setting. Okay, in the local government policy processes. So some questions that I have here. How do you understand public policy? I think yesterday, last week, you learned already what do we mean by public policy. How do you distinguish between distributive, redistributive, and regulative policy in public policy studies? And then how about macro, meso, and micro policy? And how do you understand policy cycles? What do we mean by policy analysis? How about the agenda setting, policy formulation, implementation, evaluation, policy changes, and termination? And this is the definition on how we can understand public policy cycles. It is often viewed as a conveyor belt in which issues are first recognized as a problem. Alternative courses of action are considered, and then policy are adopted, implemented, evaluated, changed, and finally terminated due to their success or failure. So if you are referring to Lister and Stewart, so public policy is like a belt. Do you know belt is like a round belt like this? So the first we have a problem, like social problem, environmental problem, or any kind of problem. And then we try to find alternative policy intervention to deal with the problem. Okay. Once we know which alternative are the best, and this is, I think, the main focus of our study in this course is on how we can find an alternative solution, on how we can find an alternative policy, okay, uh, to be adopted. And the second, the policy are adopted. For example, it can be in the form of regulations at the national level, macro level, meso level, as well as micro level. And then after it is adopted in regulation, it is implemented by agency or personnel. And after the implementation, we need to evaluate the policy. If we may need to make some changes, we can change. And finally is termination. Termination can be continued or terminated, stop. Okay, rethink again, or reevaluate it again because of the failure or maybe the success of the policy during the implementation. This is what we call as public policy cycles. You can also read the books from Stewart here, Joseph Stewart, and public policy and an evolutionary approach. So here you are, the cycles of public policy. If you can see here, the first is agenda setting. Agenda settings, as I mentioned before, on how we can identify some problem exists within the society. And the second is policy formulation. During the formulation, we have two activities here. The first is decision-making process, policy analysis, and policy adaptation. And the third stage is policy implementation, policy evaluation, policy change, and policy termination. Okay. So yeah, and here you are the agenda setting. The agenda setting is the list of subject or problem to which government officials are paying some serious attention. Okay, for example, we are facing now many problems exist within the society. For example, waste problem, bullying problem. Russia, you mentioned about bullying. Jalika, for example, about corruptions in Gambia, in your country, and etc. etc. Okay, and then uh, uh, and then as the government, they cannot solve all the problem exist within the society. They need to prioritize which issue or which problem they will solve with through the policy intervention. And why do policymakers pay more attention to an issue than the others? Because there are three reasons here. The first is the issue or the problem cannot longer be ignored. And the second, it has large impact, attracts media, and wide impact within the society. So if you want to put your political interests uh, toward an issue within the society, you need to work with the agenda setting, media agenda, and then once it is becoming news virals, for example, through the social media, it will become public agenda. Okay, once it become the public agenda, it will become political agenda discussed by the government, and the government will make the intervention. Okay, uh, this is on how we can understand the agenda setting. For example, here there are a lot of issues. Here, for example, bullying at school, traffic jams, bad condition of road, floods, forest fires, and many things, and land use change from rice field into building and into housing, into the industrial area. My question: which issue will go first to the government official agenda? Could you please just answer in the forum, guys? Uh, so this is the question of the agenda setting. And the second stage of policy cycles is policy formulation. So the policy formulation is the passage of legislation designed to remedy some past post problem or prevent some future problem. So after we are working with the agenda setting as the first stage of the policy cycles, then we need to work with the policy formulation. In the policy formulation, it's mean that there is a two or even three activities I can say. The first one is on how the policy analyze based on the knowledge, logical knowledge, research and analysis. And this is what you are going to do, try to find a policy alternatives. Okay, in this course, the objective of this course on how we can train you on to make alternative policy to deal with with the social issue. And then uh, the policy analysis based on the academic work then transform into the local legislation or into the legislation in general. And this is political process. This is policy formulation, the decision making processes, political decision making processes, where there are many parties who may have different interests, backgrounds, and etc. And they may have different opinion on how should the government deal with the problem. And the last, the policy process, the decision making or the decision made by the different parties in the policy formulation, in the political processes, is adapted in a regulation. This is what we call as policy formulation. And in the policy formulation, you have different parties involved in the decision-making processes, like executive, legislative, political parties, different political parties, different mass media owners, different interest group, and social movement organization. We will also learn about actors in policy formulation later. And this is what I call, sorry. And this is what I call as approaches in policy formulation. There is a rational comprehensive model, which is on how the decision making processes or the policy formulation is made based on research, rational model. And the second one is incremental model. Incrementals mean that we just follow what decision has made, like previously. We just follow the last year decision or even the last decision made by the government. Okay, all decision just report this in incremental model. And the last is system model. System models mean that the policy formulation started within the input from the society into the system, into the box, into the government, executive, legislative, and then there is the dynamics of political processes, and then it comes as the policy or political output in the form of a decision made by the government. And the third is policy implementation. So policy implementation is the administration on how the policy made by the government or I mean within the legislation implemented by the bureaucrats, implemented by the society, implemented by the NGOs. It can be done with by the implementation of the bureaucracy alone, but it can also be in the form of collaboration among different actors. Okay, so policy uh, in the policy studies we have like outputs and also outcomes. The outputs means that what are the goals of the policy made by the government, while the outcomes are the changes in the larger societal problem. For example, if we talk about flood issue, the output is on how to stop the flood. But if we talk about the outcomes, the floods will never happen again due to for example, the citizen, they have their awareness. They do not throw the waste anymore into the rivers, and then we have also good irrigation system and sanitary. Okay, and the first stage is policy evaluation. It is the assessment of the overall activities, program, or policy implemented. And then there are several methods in policy evaluation. The first one is process evaluation. Is the program delivered to the client? For example, if we talk about poverty policy, whether the subsidies made by the government received by the poor people. It's like process evaluation. Impact evaluations, we can also make the impact evaluation. We learn about the consequences in the impact evaluation of a policy by describing its impact. And meta evaluation, judging, it's like the judging whether the policy is success or failure. If success, we continue the policy, but if it is failure, we make a new policy or even we terminate with the policy. And the pipe stage of policy cycles is policy change. So at which a policy is evaluated and redesigned. So the entire policy process begin new. Type of policy change, the process can be linear, direct replacement of one policy by another, consolidation, merging some or previous policy into a new policy, and three is splitting, dividing the policy into two or four policy or into two or more policy. Okay, and the last is policy termination. It's ending an inadequate policy. Form of termination can be agent determination, no more agency working on that policy. Policy redirection, changing the program, and policy elimination, ending the project. So the authoritative suddenly end the policy due to political pressure from the society. This can also be happen. For example, do you know the makan siang gratis program introduced by our government? If the government implement this already, like let's say 5 years, it can be changed or even it can also be terminated. So that's all my presentation. So my question for this lecture is, could you please just explain to me how do you understand public policy and how do you understand public policy cycles? And my last question, which stage of policy cycles are the most important, whether it is like policy agenda setting, policy formulation, implementation, evaluation, changes and termination. In your opinion, which is or which stage is the most critical in the policy cycles to society? Thank you very much, guys.